Hey, it's Steph. How are you today? Today's guest is Alex Flanagan. After a great career as a sports broadcaster and sideline reporter, and after a bit of a transition period, Alex has reinvented herself and is helping the next generation of talent to blossom. And who doesn't love a great story of reinvention? Because that is what we are all doing all the time. In addition to being a mom, Alex is a senior vice president, partner, and head of women's growth at the Family Sports Marketing and Talent Agency. She represents and manages athletes, analysts, and broadcasters developing their brands through endorsements and speaking engagements and appearances, literary opportunities, and more. And why is she so good at this kind of work? Because she's done it herself and she's been there. In her broadcasting career, Alex covered 5 Olympic Games and 12 Super Bowls, having spent 12 years with the NFL Network. In 2009, she covered the Super Bowl along with John Madden and Al Michaels. And notably, Alex was also NBC's sideline reporter on its national broadcast of Notre Dame football from 2007 to 2013. She'll talk more about that in our conversation today, along with her odyssey from small town Arizona to network television. As the Another Door Opens name implies, this podcast is about opening our hearts and minds to the people, ideas, and world around us so that we can all live our lives with a little more ease and grace. During each episode you listen to, I encourage you to move if you can, in any way you can. Take a walk, stand up, sit down, stretch, extend your arms, wiggle your toes, practice your smile, or mindfully move your breath. These are all forms of opening. I'll make this fast, but I want to say thank you, I love you, to my Patreon supporters who help keep this podcast going. Join them by checking out patreon.com/anotherdooropens if you want, and you can be a patron too for as little as $1 a month. Thanks too to each of you who have left a review on Apple Podcasts. I read them. I appreciate them. So I want to hear from you too. Please subscribe and also rate and review the podcast and let me know your thoughts. I want to know. This is the Another Door Opens podcast, and I'm your host, Stephanie Himango. Here's my lovely guest today, Alex Flanagan. And if you're a regular, I bet you know what I'm about to ask her. I like to open each conversation here with the question, what do the words Another Door Opens mean to you, if anything?
Those words mean a lot to me. And as I think about it, they're meaningful in different ways. So I think one door opens or another door opens signifies that something has closed. So I think that's where I start. And so typically when something closes, I think there's somewhat of a grieving process in some way, shape, or form that surrounds that. So I think the first step or meaning in that process is understanding what that looks like. So what door has closed and how do you say goodbye to that? And how do you wrap that little package up and send it on its way and take the lessons that you've learned from something and apply them to the next step, which is the door that has opened. I think the door that now is open can be so many different things. I think a lot of adjectives come to mind. It can be scary. It can mean opportunity. It can mean a fresh start. It can mean a chance to do something different and apply all those life lessons that you've learned or mistakes that you've made that you can learn from. Ultimately, though, I think it means new opportunities and new chances and opportunities to do things better and different.
Yeah. And I think it's a lifelong process that we're in a continual cycle of new opportunities or opportunities that have opened and closed for us. I think I remember seeing on your website that you describe yourself as a daughter of a Marine and a cattle rancher. Can you tell us a little bit about your family life coming up, where you grew up, and what kinds of things you were interested in your early years?
So I'm one of 6 children. I grew up on a ranch in kind of the middle of nowhere in southern Arizona, close to the Mexican border, a small town called Elgin, Arizona, which is like an hour outside of Tucson, Arizona. My parents, I think, were a little non-traditional, certainly back then, in that my mom was a cattle rancher. So she worked in a very male-dominated field. Her father owned a ranch there, and she grew up helping and ranching with him. And that was always her passion. Eventually, she and my father moved back to Arizona. He was in the Marine Corps. He was a pilot, very passionate about that, fought in Vietnam and loved that history. But at some point they decided to have him get out of the Marine Corps, and they moved for an opportunity back to Arizona where she had grown up, and they started this ranch and a few other entrepreneurial business projects. So I grew up on this ranch and spent a lot of time around animals, and we showed cattle, and my mom breeds cattle and she still does that to this day. I guess a little bit of a different upbringing in that we had that type of lifestyle, but then my parents also really wanted to expose us, I think, to some of the things that my mom had when she was growing up. They were very passionate about education and making sure that they set us up for that. So we had the opportunity to go to a private Catholic school in Tucson. So they drove us an hour each way to high school and gave us that opportunity because there weren't a lot of choices down in the very, very small town that I grew up in. So at the same time, they own a restaurant. They still own that down there. It's called the Stakeout. And so we all grew up working in that restaurant. And
That's cool.
Bus tables and bartended and waitressed kind of from the time I was probably like 10 years old. Yeah, in hindsight, I have 3 children of my own, and I look back on what I'd like to take away from my upbringing and what I can utilize from that as I parent kids. And I think, there was a fair amount of grit in our upbringing, a ton of independence and figuring it out. And I think those are a few of the things that we were given that I think I can really look back on and realize how much they attributed to my success professionally.
I really like that Alex mentioned grit and independence here, because as you'll hear going forward, she exercised grit from her youngest years to the time she set out to start a career in broadcasting and throughout. I wondered if she dreamed of being a journalist or a sports broadcaster in those young days of living on the ranch.
Oh, Stephanie, I love the idea of when you think about what you did as a kid is ultimately what you should be doing in your career, I guess, as a professional. I always loved performance. I always loved creating shows. My parents would have people over for dinner, and I would make everybody come into the living room and watch some show that I had directed. I'd taken all the kids and dressed them up in sheets and had music, and we would do dances, and I loved just performing in front of people. And then I tried to create my own magazine at one point, which was so funny because we had obviously nothing digital. I was growing up in the day where you had to use an actual camera and then take it to get the photos developed. So we would take pictures, get them developed. And then with this cardboard background, we would create this magazine. And I had a goal. I was probably 10 and 11. My goal was to send that in and get it published. And, so we made these magazines, and then I actually did newscasts. I did little mock newscasts with my family's big old home video recorder. And I would use my poor little sister and 2 little brothers, my cousin. I would dress them up and get them behind a fake little news desk. And we would create little stories that you would hard edit in the camera. You would just stop and start. So we'd have every scene perfectly figured out and then start and stop. So it would self-edit. So anyways, TMI, but I do kind of look back on that and I was oh, it's funny. I didn't really connect the dots, but I was kind of always destined for some sort of career in front of the camera or around it or something like that, because I really loved kind of that performance and that orchestration and even that attention, I think, if you will, of kind of being in the spotlight.
That is really cool. And I saw that one of your first anchor jobs was in Alexandria, Minnesota, after growing up in Arizona. And as a Minnesotan, I don't know if you know that about me.
Oh, I didn't know that about you.
I think that is a pretty significant change of geography and way of life. What did that feel like to make that kind of a change that early in your life and early in your career?
So I really wondered if I might die in Minnesota the year that I lived there. I got out of college and I really wanted to work in TV, and I sent out all these tapes and, just kind of tried to bang down some doors. And one day out of the blue, I got a call from a woman named Raylan Story, who was the assistant news director, I think at the time, at a small station in Alexandria. And she said, "We saw your tape. We think you're good. We want to offer you a job." And so I was okay. My dad and I drove across the country from Arizona with a little U-Haul behind us, and he moved me out there into this cabin that I had rented on a lake. And I moved in December, and I was so clueless. And I think my parents were kind of clueless too, because I had grown up in Arizona and like, I think I'd been skiing a couple times in my life. So I've like been in the snow sort of, but like, I really didn't know what long underwear were. I didn't know what full socks were. I didn't know what Sorel boots were. I didn't know what like down jackets were.
Right.
So like, I really didn't have any of the gear. And I think my first job, I was making like $15,000.
Mm-hmm.
I could hardly afford to be there. And I remember my first heating bill, I'd rented this really cute little lake cabin and it was this darling place. And I came to learn up there that like people in the Twin Cities have these cabins on the lakes that they use in the summer, but they don't touch in the winter, right?
Yes.
So I got it for like a good price in the winter and it had these floor heaters. You know, I cranked the heat up. It had this cool loft, so these high ceilings. So the first time I got my electric bill, I think I probably did start crying.
Mm-hmm.
It was like $700 or $800. It was like more than I was making in the whole month. So then I learned that I couldn't really heat the place.
Oh my gosh.
So needless to say, it was a great learning experience. The cold was really traumatizing for me and I was not at all prepared for it. So needless to say, like I spent one winter there and then I was like, oh my gosh, I think I need to find a job in another place. So I moved to Montgomery, Alabama and got my second job there, which was a total different experience.
Yeah, no blizzards.
Yeah, it was great. In hindsight, had I had the right equipment, I think I would have been much better off and much more capable of surviving. But I loved that job. And I was what we know of in the industry as a one-man band where
mm-hmm.
you had to do everything. You shot everything. You did your stand-ups by yourself. You edited everything. I was the weekend news anchor. I ran the teleprompter with my foot. Like I learned everything and I loved the people that I worked with and we covered all of northern Minnesota. So you get a story and you would drive like up to Bemidji or, you know, you'd drive like 2 hours to get like a soundbite and then 2 hours back and then edit it. I loved what I took away from it. And I remember it really fondly now. And when I speak to people, young people that want to get into the business, I'm always like, it's such a great way to start your career by kind of learning all these different verticals so that when you do get to a point where you have the opportunity just to do one, like just be a reporter or just be an anchor or just be a shooter, like you kind of really have this true appreciation for what everybody else does and how much of a team it takes to put something on TV.
I think that a lot of times when people are in their early 20s and they're starting out in their career, there's so many unknowns and like you said, so much excitement, but there's also a lot of fear. Is there anything in particular that comes to mind that you learned about yourself during that time?
Oh my gosh, I haven't really thought about it in that context, but yes, so much. I mean, I think first, just that I could survive, that I could do it. I think that part of my upbringing created a little bit of a naivety. I grew up kind of as a small town girl and really excited to kind of take that next step into the big world. My parents really raised us that you could kind of do anything you wanted. So I never really had a doubt that I couldn't do it. And I didn't really overthink it because honestly, like, I think I was pretty naive and maybe a little dumb. So I wasn't, yeah. So I mean, maybe that comes with youth too. So you're just like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to take over the world. And I graduated from college and I wanted to be on 60 Minutes. Like I loved that show. My mom loved watching the news. Like news was always on in our home. My dad came home every night and watched the nightly news. So I was like, I'm going to get a job in TV. I'm going to be on 60 Minutes. And I never really thought about whether or not that was viable or anything. You know, I just kind of started sending out tapes, got a job, went. You know, one of the big lessons is just that you can do it. Like, yeah. Whatever you really put your mind to, I think a lot of times you can do it. But I think the other lesson that I talk a lot about with people is really what it comes down to is ultimately how badly you want it and how much you're willing to sacrifice for it. And part of that experience really taught me too that it was an incredible job. It didn't pay a ton, but it also prohibited me from doing a lot of the things that my peers were doing at the time. Like, you know, I couldn't travel because I couldn't afford it. I had to work on weekends every weekend. So there were a lot of people throughout the years of doing that job in TV that, you know, you'd kind of see people fall off and decide that they wanted a regular life or they wanted something different. And I think so the realization of just the commitment, the work ethic, the determination that it takes ultimately to get ahead in some of these fields, that's kind of what it comes down to. It's talent plus desire.
Yeah. How did your trajectory sort of move from being hard news to moving into sports broadcasting?
So totally like random and unplanned. And I think you look at like these twists and turns in our lives and our careers. And it's funny to kind of look back on things. And I think some of that comes with youth too. So I had met who is now my husband in college. We dated in college. So we've been together for forever. Mm-hmm. He was working for Oakley Sunglasses at the time. So I had taken the job in Minnesota. I had moved to Alabama. And I had just like signed with my first agent, was kind of getting my TV career really going. And he called and said, hey, Oakley wants to send me to Europe to head up their European sports marketing. Do you want to come? Like, do you want to get married? And do you want to if we got married, would you come? And I remember calling one of my dear friends, her name's Marianne, who was one of my college friends. And she at the time was we were paralleling each other a little bit in our careers, and that she had left also Arizona and was living in New York City and was working for MTV and the Jon Stewart show at the time. And I was like, oh my God. So like we would talk about our careers, and I said, Kevin's called me. He wants me to move to Paris. And it would mean I would have to quit the job, and I don't know what to do. And I thought for sure she'd be like, absolutely not. Like you're on this career trajectory. It's going to be awesome. And she was like, oh my God, move. You've got to move. No, it's Paris. Are you crazy? Like, so I quit my job, giving you all the way too many details, but I quit my job, moved to Paris with Kevin, and we got married and kind of started our life there. And
Did you get married in Paris?
We got married in Arizona, actually, at my parents' ranch, but cool. I lived in Paris with him during that time. So we spent like the first year of our married life living in Paris, France. And then when we moved back, Oakley was based in Orange County and still is. And so I said, well, why don't we kind of split the difference and get a place like in LA? And then I can at least like see if I can get a job back in TV. And I knew kind of that I wasn't experienced enough really to get like an on-air job in LA, because I had been in like the Montgomery, Alabama market and probably wouldn't make that jump to, LA, I think was the number 2 market at the time. So I probably couldn't get on air there. So I just started kind of pounding the pavement and trying to get any job I could. And I interviewed, I remember I was willing to really do anything, like be a writer, a production assistant. I interviewed with like the Donnie and Marie Osmond show and the Roseanne Barr talk show, and was using kind of all these connections, and nothing had really come about. And a friend of ours, a guy named Bruce Fraser, who we'd gone to school with, was neighbors with a guy that worked at Fox. His name was Matt. And so Bruce said, let me introduce you to Matt. And Matt brought me into Fox and walked me into the office of Fox Sports. And they were just launching the Fox Sports Network, or they had already launched it, but they were building it. And I met with a man there, and he said, well, you seem like you can do news, you can produce, and you can do on-air stuff. What if we hire you for / reporter, producer, jack of all trades role at Fox Sports? And I had never done sports before. And I was like, okay. And that was effectively kind of how I got into sports. A really big left turn. And then from there, I eventually got a job with ESPN. And then from ESPN, moved to the NFL Network. And at the same time I worked for the NFL Network, I worked for NBC. And that's where you and I first met, was during an Olympics. Spent many years with the NFL Network and with NBC doing a ton of pro football, Notre Dame football, and then, of course, the Olympics with NBC as well.
What an odyssey.
Wow, that's a long answer.
I love it. If you were to explain to somebody who didn't orbit in the world of sports, even as a fan or a participant, in terms of that broadcasting work you did within sports, how did you explain that type of work to people? Like, what did you do?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because we laugh all the time at like my mother-in-law. I still don't think that she fully understands what I do.
Yep.
I think in some ways people saw me and saw what I did. So they would see my face pop up during a Notre Dame game on a Saturday they were watching on NBC. But I don't ever think that people outside the business really understand the job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you have the same experiences as people don't really understand the nuts and bolts of what you're doing when it comes to the research or setting up the stories or doing the interviews and then delivering it. What I would just kind of boil it down to is that I'm a journalist and I collect data and information and people's stories, and then narrow that down to a small little piece of information that is then shareable and shared nowadays, gosh, through so many different distribution channels. But, back then just through television, through NBC or NFL Network or whoever it was that I was working for.
As a sportscaster in roles as broad as studio, sideline, field reporter, and more, you've interviewed hundreds of athletes, maybe thousands, and worked side by side as one of the best in sports broadcasting. And in that role, you're given an opportunity to kind of open the door into an athlete's heart and mind for viewers. What was your approach and intention in those interviews so that you could draw out the best and like the true essence of athletes and the people that you were interviewing?
I guess one of the most important, I don't know if trait is the right word, but skills maybe to create a good interview is to be able to listen.
Yeah.
And I think that took me a long time to really understand, because I think in the anxiety of trying to do an interview, you do all this research, and I'm a total type A personality. So I would read a ton and write a ton of notes, and then I'd, have my huge list of questions, and then I'd sit across from somebody and I'd have this, big list of questions on my lap, and I'd kind of go through those and I would just fire off one after the other. And at some point you realize like you're kind of missing, because if you're not really listening and then actually following up on what that person is telling you, you miss all these opportunities to like open up a conversation and really learn about somebody. So I think listening is probably the key into getting somebody to open their minds and their hearts to you, and then following up with actually what they're saying and actually hearing what they're saying. I think, an interview also is about the interview subject. And I think it's hard sometimes to really understand that the goal of it is to do what you just said, which is like to learn about somebody, to get somebody to open up. And it's not about the interviewer at all. So making sure that you understand how you react and what you asked. And it's not a conversation with somebody where you're giving your opinion or you're getting defensive about something or you're getting heated about something. You're really focused on somebody else and trying to get them to open up and to draw them out. And so I think even, as I got further along in the process of my career, really understanding that it is a little bit also of an experiment in psychology in terms of like, how do you make somebody comfortable with you? How do you make them feel like you really care about them? How do you make them feel like they're safe in opening up and sharing with you? And those are the same things that just apply, I think, in any everyday relationship. There's social skills, there's people skills, there's trust. There's also showing people long term that you value them and you value their story. And I think as journalists, that is one of the most precious pieces of the equation for me, is that you get to take somebody's story and you get to share it. But in that, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility in that you're deciding how to tell that person's story. And I think people are very aware that once they hand their story over, it can be kind of out of their control. So the trust that they have to have, I think, in us, producers and reporters and the people that really have the power to tell that story and to put it out there. And so I think that's just kind of an interesting layer in it, is really just, being able to facilitate that trust in somebody that you care about them enough to care about their story, and making sure that you put it out there in a way that is meaningful and representative of who they are and what their story is.
Yes. And just to underscore something you said there, I think there's a lesson in that for all of us in interacting with, anybody that we have a conversation with, whether it's ever intended to be turned out into a story elsewhere, or if we're just having a conversation with somebody.
Yeah. Those skills are hard, right? And I think we learn them less and less each day in this society that we live in now, where we have less and less interpersonal reactions or actions, where so much of it is through text message and social media and things that you're kind of interpreting, and you don't really get this opportunity to really communicate. and learn about people and kind of practice some of those skills.
As an on-air personality, and I know you're transitioning or transitioned out of that, but you open yourself up to public opinion. How do you handle the pluses and minuses that come with visibility and exposure? And what's your advice to others who try to navigate that court of public opinion?
I think that what you just said is very accurate in that there's good and there's bad. So I think you have to go into it knowing that. Coach said to me years ago in a meeting with him, if you're going to believe the good press, then you have to believe the bad or be willing to. So I don't listen to any of it. And I thought it was a good point because I think so often it's really easy to read great things about yourself and it's harder to read bad things about yourself. So I think at some point you either have to decide as a person, like, I'm not going to pay attention to any of that, or I'm open to taking the negative feedback and the positive feedback. So I think that's one side of it. And then I think the other part of it that I really came to practice as much as I could, and I think it's what gives you your sanity, is you don't take advice or you don't take criticism or you don't really listen to people that aren't in your circle. Somebody can criticize you that has no idea, going back to your earlier question, like what your job entails. And so are you really going to listen to somebody that doesn't even really know or have the right to tell you that you're doing a good job or a bad job because they have no visibility to actually what your job is? And so I think, you have to be selective in who you actually listen to and who you actually let in. And I think consciously deciding that is really helpful. So when you have a mentor or when you have a boss or when you have a peer that you trust and that you care about and they care about you, then you listen to some of the hard feedback from them. I think the hard thing about being in a public or an on-air position, if you will, is that it is a very subjective business and certain people like you and certain people don't like you. And sometimes it has nothing to do, or not sometimes, oftentimes, it really has nothing to do with you personally. It has to do with like what somebody else's preferences are, right? So it's similar to like being a model or being like, you can look at somebody and find them really beautiful. And I might look at that same person and be like, oh, they're not really like, that's not really my definition of beauty. And I think the same thing applies in the world of, what I did, which is like somebody can look at you and listen to you and be like, wow, I think they do a really great job. And then somebody else might be like, I don't really like their style. And it's not a personal attack necessarily on somebody. It's just kind of how we operate as human beings, right? So I think really having an understanding of that and being able to mentally kind of wrap your arms around that, which is easier said than done, which is like, well, it's not that they don't like me. It's just that I don't maybe fit what their definition is or what their, I don't know, what they like, I guess. So trying to take the personalness out of it. Gosh, I feel like I could go on forever on this subject because I think it is a really difficult thing. I think you have to have a thick skin. You can't listen to what people say if they're people that don't matter to you. Another component of it is just being willing to, in some ways, also not care. Because I don't think you'll survive in this business if you care what everybody thinks about you. There's so many people that are going to tell you can't do it, and so many people that tell you not to or give you reasons why you can't. And I think ultimately, all it takes is like one person that believes you can, that opens that door for you. And there you go. But you're going to get a lot of people that won't open that door probably before you find that one person that will.
I just want to add, we can't be all things to all people, can we? What we can do is be honest with ourselves, do our very best to actualize ourselves to the best of our abilities, and to show up as a good friend and a good human in the world. We transition here to motherhood, including what Alex learns from her children and what she hopes to instill in them. I love her transparency.
So I have two daughters. I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old daughter. And then I have a 13-year-old son. And they really teach me so much every day. They're such, all three of them are such individual people and are so just cool. And it's been such a privilege to get to watch them grow and to get to be a parent to them, which really is such a privilege, and that you're given these three lives that you get to shape and and I hope I'm not messing them up too badly. But so I think their generation is teaching me a lot about judgment. I think we all grow up where we have our rules and kind of what our generations are and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And then the next generation comes along and they do things differently. And I think as a parent, you can either kind of say like, no, that's not how we do it, or that's not how it's done. Or you can also kind of embrace and let them create this new life, right? And every generation is so different. There's new pieces of technology and there's new ways we live. And it changes so much. So being open to that is one of the things that you're challenged, or I'm challenged with as a parent, and allowing them really to be their own human beings. That's a huge challenge too, is really allowing them to create their own path, if you will, and being able to step back and say, well, maybe that's not what I would do, or that's not how I would do it, or that's not how I want them to do it. But letting them do that and realizing that it's not really it's not about me. It's about them, and it's about guiding them and being there with them and helping them kind of become and create the best lives and be the best people that they can be. As girls, we talk a lot about women, actually, and about how you treat each other, and about how it's common, I think, at their age. There's a lot of mean girl behavior. There's a lot of comparisons. Social media is really hard for them. So we talk through a lot of that stuff. We talk about giving people the benefit of the doubt, assuming positive intent, realizing that everybody probably is jealous, or everybody feels left out, or everybody at times feels insecure. So know that about people. And then we talk a lot about figuring out what completes you and what makes you happy, and going after those things, and not really living by other people's standards, but trying to create a life that like makes you happy ultimately, right? Because happiness is so different for each one of us. And I think too often we get caught up in like, oh, like with their age, like if I get into this college, or if I get these grades, or if I'm part of this club, or if I'm, on the A team as opposed to the B team, then I'm going to be better liked and more successful. And really trying to guide them away from kind of the labels and those things that I think a lot of kids think will make them happy. And then really helping them tap into like, what does bring you happiness? What does give you relief? Like what hobbies, what things in your life can you utilize to really help you de-stress, to help you give you self-care, to help you, as you go forward in life, to kind of decompress, which I think we're all always searching for.
One thing I think is really cool is that while Alex is helping guide her own children in their lives, she's also allowing herself to grow in her own right, and helping nurture and advance the careers of her clients in her role as a talent agent. So I asked her about that and why she chose this type of work.
Yeah, so I actually am a partner in an agency called The Family. So our founder is a guy named Steve Astafan, and he was with a big agency called the Wasserman Group for many, many years. And I think he was the first action sports agent many, many years ago, and created his own business called The Family way back when. And then Wasserman bought that agency, and he now is rebirthing it, if you will, and doing it all over again. So it's been kind of cool to go through this with him as well, because he's on a very similar path, if you will, as I am, in kind of doing this new entrepreneurial thing again. He's done it before, so he's far more experienced in this. But I think we have a lot of parallels as we're doing this together. So it, again, was kind of one of those things that came about. And I love just kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, when one door closes, others open. So kind of being ready for those opportunities and being able to jump when they do come your way. I had decided to really step back from my life and my career and just really see what I wanted to do. I call it my next 20 years. I had this incredible career in television, and I just was burnt out. Didn't really want to be on the road as much as I was. And the media business in general, I think, has really changed from what it had been when I got my degree in it coming out of college. And there's a lot more in it now that has to do with social media and analytics. And it wasn't just the storytelling and the fact gathering and sourcing things. And some of the things that I loved about it have really changed. So I decided I wanted to maybe see if there were some other ways that I could utilize my experience and the great relationships that I had built and the credible reputation that I had in the industry, and see what other avenues I could pursue where I might be able to capitalize on that. And we had a meeting, Steve and I did, and next thing I knew, I was joining him in this business venture, and it really hadn't been planned, but it gave me a big white space to figure out what I wanted to do. And right away, I had an opportunity to work with broadcasters in the business in helping represent and guide them. And my first TV client is a woman named Kimberly Martin, who I had met a couple of years before when she was a writer for the Washington Post. And we've had this opportunity to work together, and it's been just so magical for me. And through her kind of launching that, we've built a broadcasting department now at this agency, and I'm representing a number of clients now and learning that side of the business. And it's been really, really fulfilling for me in that it's a way for me to really keep my foot, I think, in the pond, if you will, of the TV business, but in a very different way. And I feel like I'm able to kind of give back the mentorship and really do things differently, in that I had been represented by people and I had been very exposed to the agency business, and I'd found it to be somewhat of a broken business model, and really wanted to do it in a way where I could give my clients a little bit more. And so I'm kind of this unique person right now, and there's not a lot of people representing people that have actually done the on-air job and really understand what it's like to work in that capacity in the day-to-day environment of it, and just knows, like you said, what's the description of what you do. So many people don't really fully understand that. And so I've done it. So I can really relate to, all of it. And then at the same time, be able to obviously kind of guide and give that mentorship, but then kind of make this a business for myself, where I'm also bringing to the table, I think, some of the things that I wish I would have had from people that I worked with when I was a talent in the business. So I'm trying to really take all the things that I wish I would have had and how I wish I would have done it, and really make that who I become for my clients. And so it's been really magical to kind of create this partnership. And then, with the evolution of media, there's so many new and different opportunities, and that's been kind of fun to guide that. And then through Steve, the founder, and that group of great people that he's brought together in the family, I'm really getting to learn a lot of other parts of the business, more the marketing side of the business. So it's been fun. It's been frightening. I think anytime you try something new, like I just keep reminding myself, like it just takes time to get your feet underneath you. And I think all of us, when we try something new, you kind of have that overwhelming feeling of like, oh my God, it's never going to be second nature. And I just feel so like overwhelmed, and I don't understand this, and I'm never going to be able to do this without a certain whatever it is that you think you need. And then all of a sudden, like you find yourself in this place, you're like, wow, you look back and, a couple of years have passed and you're like, oh my gosh, like I've actually done it. Right. And I think that's like one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give people is like, nothing is built overnight. And you really like things take years to build. And so patience is such a big part of really when that door opens, you have to have patience, and you just have to know that good things take a long time to build.
I love this piece of advice so much that I'll just reiterate it here for all of us. Nothing is built overnight. I'm hearing this. I'm heeding this. Keep going. Walk on. Okay. I wanted to know, was there a door in Alex's life that had closed, that in retrospect she was glad closed? And if so, what she learned from that?
I don't know if glad would be the right word. Like I think in talking about this transition that I've made in my career, I don't know if I'm glad necessarily that the door closed. I did Notre Dame football, and that door closed for me, and that wasn't on my terms. NBC made a decision that they wanted to go a different direction. And so I suppose as I think about it now, like that was a big door that closed for me that I was really, really sad about. And I think anytime it's not on your terms and a job's taken away from you that you really loved and thought you were good at, that's tough, right?
Yeah.
But yes, I think the lessons that you learn from that and the perspective you get from it, and I think I can look back on that now and say it was a huge disappointment, but it was, I think it takes those things in your life to really propel you sometimes into doing something new. And then how you react to those things is so critical, right? To our success and to how you come out of it. And I think You have to give yourself some time to go back to what I said earlier, to grieve. Mm-hmm. And I went through a really big grieving process with that because that was a huge part of my identity. It was a huge part of my financial security. It was, there were so many things that I was kind of sad about when that went away. Once I kind of allowed myself to grieve, and then you have to kind of pick yourself up and say, like, okay, well, what's next? And there are times where you're really like, there were times in hindsight where I was like, I don't know is my career kind of over? I actually kind of thought that at times, like, is this kind of like, am I on the other side now, just going down? And you then get away from that. I think once you start something else and you kind of laugh at yourself and you're like, no, you just have to get back out there and really get after it. And I think what I have found that's been so rewarding is that there are so many people, as I did kind of get back out there and pick up the phone and reconnect. There were so many people that have been so gracious and so willing to help me and so abundant with their time. And I think that's been a really wonderful reminder of how many people there actually are out there willing to help if you just ask for it.
I think it's so interesting what you mentioned about grieving. I think you're the first person who I've asked that question of who talked about that. It is definitely a common denominator among every single closed door or ending that anyone could ever experience.
And I'm sure it's different for everybody, depending on, how big of a door was closed, right? Mm-hmm. But some of it, I'm sure, is also just getting used to habits and I think as you age, it is a little harder when you're older. My 40-something-year-old self is really different from that 20-something-year-old self that I told you, like, jumped in a car with a U-Haul and just took off to Minnesota without a thought.
To a lakeside cabin in the middle of winter. Brr.
Yeah. Without any research, without any, anything. You just did it. And I think we get a lot more cautious, right, as we age. And I guess we have more responsibilities. One of the lessons I've learned too, I think, is that I think sometimes when you go through those hard times and doors are closed and you kind of curl up and you don't feel great, so then you don't reach out to people, and then people really don't know what to do for you either. And so it kind of becomes this weird little circle in that you feel more isolated because you're not reaching out, and then people really don't know how to respond. And we all do that, right? Like when people kind of go away, you don't really go after them, which is actually probably what most people need, but it's not human nature to kind of aggressively do that. So everybody kind of backs off. The hard thing for most of us is really to kind of stand up and be like, I need people, or I need you, or I need you to, like, I'm going to be really ugly right now, and I need people to help me and stay with me and like support me through this. And I think that if you can tap into that in any way of just kind of understanding that people really want to be there for you, I think, when doors closed or when you're going through hard times. But I think sometimes being direct in knowing how to ask for that help. And I guess if I could go back in some of my experiences in life now, I think maybe that would be one thing I would change, is instead of just trying to go through it myself and figure it out, like, I think I might have been more vulnerable and vocal in just really directly telling people, like, hey, this is what I need. Like, call me once a week and check in on me, or I need you to like introduce me to 10 people or help me network, or, whatever it was.
I think we all tend to isolate when things aren't going the way we'd like them to be.
Yeah.
One thing I think that's really cool about the work that you've started doing now, and I know you still feel new at it, but your career now is to help promote and elevate the careers of other people. I mean, that has got to feel pretty good. It
really does. It's a big responsibility. So, and sometimes when clients are calling and asking me now, like, what should I do? I feel, feral, like I got to give them the right answer. So I think it's a big responsibility, but it's such a gift. And here's the thing. I used to think I was really good at what I did. And I still do think I was good at, when I was in front of the camera, I think I was good at it. But I get to work with people now that I'm like, wow, they're so talented. And it's really fun and exciting to tap into different people and see all the different gifts that people have and just really how talented they are. And I think the really amazing thing about what I'm getting to do right now is, as an agent, you're like helping guide somebody and mentor them and shape their career. And so it's a really wonderful thing in that there's not a lot of jobs where you have kind of a partner helping support you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a cool setup in that way, in that you've got kind of a therapist, career coach, negotiator type person alongside you. And so I think that's been like really fun for me to be able to kind of use my own experience, but then, also I have to be conscious of it's not my career and it's not my experience that matters. And it goes back to that interview question you asked. I have to really be disciplined in listening and thinking about my clients as who they are, not how I was in my career, or what I would have done, or what I should have done differently, or all of that. But I think that it is a really big gift to be able to be on this journey with the people that I'm getting to be on the journey with. And hopefully I can provide them a lot of value and insight. And I just feel, in some ways, I just feel really honored that I get to be part of these people's lives. And people have had so much trust in me also, which is phenomenal. And that, COVID presented this whole new problem of not being able to travel, and people that do the job of being in the representation business. Typically you're meeting with people all the time and seeing people. And so I'm working with a number of clients right now that I've never actually met in person, which is like amazing to me that, that they would sign with me and allow me to help represent them in their career, without ever meeting me. So there's a lot of trust. And I think one of the things that I took away from my time being represented by people, and not always what I thought was done well, is really wanting to bring just an integrity of, like, you're dealing with somebody's career and somebody's life. And so somebody has a lot of trust in you when they allow you to kind of come into that part of their life.
Well, I think they're all in very good hands with you, because they can see not only your experience, but your integrity, like you were saying, and also just the type of person that you are. So I can't wait to follow the careers of the people whose lives you're touching.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun.
And if you're like me, I know you might want to follow Alex's next career too. So here is where you can find her online.
I started a long time ago my own website called alexflanagan.com. And I always found that I had so much information that just kind of hit the cutting room floor. So I started this as a way of putting out information that didn't make it on air. And so I'm trying now to put on there some blog posts on just some of the industry stuff that I'm learning that I think is valuable to people.
Alex is also active on Twitter, where her handle is @Alex_Flanagan, and on Instagram @Alex.Flanagan. Thank you so, so much for saying yes to coming on here today and sharing some of your world and your insights. And I just really appreciate you. And I'm excited to watch what you're doing as you go forward.
And likewise, as we have this whole conversation, I've had my eye on you this whole time. And I'm so proud of you. And I'm so proud of you just taking the step and creating something. And I think so often you look around and you see somebody doing something and it's like, I could do that too. And you've done it. So kudos to you. And I can't wait to see how you continue to grow as well.
Alex Flanagan, thank you for being my lovely guest today and for sharing your journey with us. Not only did you have one fabulous career, you are now at the beginning of another one. And I can't wait to see the way you guide and lead with integrity and insight and enthusiasm. I'll be posting a few pictures related to this episode on my social media pages, like always. So follow on Instagram and Twitter @Steph Himango and @PodcastADO. If you want to, take a second to share this episode with someone and rate and review it on Apple. To my Patreon supporters, thank you again for believing in the power of story and supporting the show. If you're interested in becoming a patron too, you can go to patreon.com/anotherdooropens to find out some of the options there, starting at $1 a month. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Those Another Door Opens drum beats were made by the amazing Eric Brown. And that is this week's episode of the Another Door Opens podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Think about how you can practice opening in your life today, and I'll do the same. I'll see you next time. Love you. Bye.